Got that last final push. And we're live. Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you for joining. I am Patrick Cumming, Director of Marketing at Client Boost, the performance marketing agency with aggressive accountability and obsessive proactivity. So today I am joined by Primer founder and growth guy, Keith Putnam Delaney, and we're going to be showing you how demand gen B2Bs can reach and convert their ICP audience on B2C channels. It's going to be all killer, no filler. But Keith, before we get started, why don't you quickly introduce yourself to everybody?
Hey Patrick, I wish I had some like good quippy, taglines like you do. I got to work on my game. I'm Keith. I'm one of
it's
the
practice, reps and sets, man.
yeah, got to get out there more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey everybody, I'm Keith. I'm one of the co-founders here at Primer. My background's in growth marketing and more recently in kind of product and engineering. Become a weird data guy and figured out with Primer, we've basically figured out how to unlock targeting on B2C channels and shifting into more measurement features now too. And just really excited to talk with you guys today, talk with Patrick and explain, sort of the different plays you can run and how you can make these channels work in an environment that is not friendly to digital advertising right now.
Yeah, and you could argue it's getting less friendly, I think, as well, Keith. Cool. So I'll give you guys a quick overview of the agenda of what we're going to run through today. So really starting out with the core problem that Keith kind of alluded to a little bit there, which is the reason that you actually need to expand demand generation onto B2C channels. And I think I want to preface this with everything that we're talking about today isn't theoretical. So this is stuff that we've either tried on our own Client Boost performance channels this year, are currently rolling out with our own clients, and also from case studies that Keith has run with some of his own customers over at Primer. And so based on that, we're going to be running you through 5 new demand generation playbooks that you can run on B2C channels that is going to show you how to do that correctly, because I think we all know what native targeting on those channels is like, specifically for the B2B audiences. And then from there, I think this is a little known but awesome feature that Primer has is the kind of like tracking side of these B2C channels, which again, much harder to track than LinkedIn ads and Google ads, even to some degree. And so we're going to be talking you through how to actually measure and optimize performance of those hard to track channels. And then there's quite a lot that we're trying to squeeze in here. So if there is any time at the end, we'll do a Q&A session. But DM inboxes are open for both me and Keith if anybody wants to drop us a DM with questions afterwards if we don't get to that. So with that, Keith, I'm going to hand over to you next just to kind of discuss the main problem here on why companies need to expand demand generation to B2C channels.
I mean, I think everybody understands and sees this with what they're doing on search and LinkedIn. LinkedIn CPMs are rising. Everybody's kind of pouring their money in there. With search, you kind of hit a plateau in what you can achieve, especially now that AI generated responses are starting to dominate. And then, so you're kind of like stuck in this war of attrition, essentially. So where do you find opportunity? And I think a lot of it exists on B2C channels. The problem is you don't have the filters on those channels that you need in order to target your B2B ICP. Um, that is, I think, the core problem that we're trying to solve. Along the way, there's also a lot of challenges, I think, in making those channels work, as even LinkedIn is now 60 to 80%, depending upon the metrics you look at mobile first. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you kind of make these channels work that are even more like 95% mobile first, when at the end of the day, most people, when they sign up for a B2B product, are doing it on their desktop. So dealing with that device divide becomes really, really challenging, so that, ad platforms either, overestimate their success, as you've seen, I think, Patrick, or drastically underestimate it because somebody sees the ad on their phone, but ends up converting on their desktop and they have no way of linking those two
Mm-hmm.
things. So, there's a there's a really like, I think, cool opportunity right now that people are being forced into to reassess how they approach performance marketing and paid digital in this new era.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And it's kind of jumping on that last point that you mentioned around ad platforms overestimating their success. It really does feel like they're both overestimating at the program level. And so one thing that we say to companies is don't be using the in-platform metrics to go and take to your CFO or your CEO or CMO to tell them how well the program is performing, because that's not the right thing to do, especially given I think the average B2B journey is hundreds of touch points at this point. And so what you're going to find is that Google, Meta, LinkedIn, all the different platforms are going to have a conversion logged for the same closed deal. And so that's where it's kind of overestimating their success a little bit. But I also think it's underestimating on the flip side because of the privacy concerns as well. And so with more people having ad blockers, with more people moving to, like you mentioned, Safari and Firefox, it just isn't able to connect as much of the data. And so that means that we kind of need a new approach to actually measure this stuff. And I think I would even add a fifth one that's based on one of the recommendations, actually, when I was still working with clients last year and recommended Primer to them, is that some audiences, so Client Boost is very lucky because we target marketing managers, directors. And so with LinkedIn, we can get about 86% audience penetration on LinkedIn alone. So our audience is very, very active on LinkedIn. But for other companies that I've worked with, so engineers, for example, I've worked in the healthcare space targeting surgeons. It gets very tricky to push audience penetration, sometimes even above 50%. And so the only way to realistically reach more target accounts and more ICPs is to go outside of LinkedIn to channels where we know they are spending time, like Meta, like Reddit, for example, and even, to some degree, YouTube and display.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm waiting for somebody to raise their hand and say they want to do TikTok because we've got the data. We can make it happen. Yeah.
There we go. Hopefully there's somebody in the audience watching right now that reaches out to you to do some B2B advertising on TikTok. With that, I think that's a really good segue into the first playbook that I wanted to talk about, which is something that I'm calling brand lift campaigns. And this is going to be the most obvious play, but I really, really love it. And so what we do with these brand lift campaigns is the beauty of Primer, and something that we did at Client Boost at the very beginning of 2025 was we basically rebuilt our ICP from the ground up based on the most recent data, built that audience in Primer. And then not only did we target that audience on LinkedIn ads, but we then sent that same audience to Google, so we're able to target on display, and YouTube. We also sent that same audience to Reddit, and the great thing about Reddit is the CPMs were crazy low. I can't remember the exact number, but it was like less than $5 CPMs, which was absolutely wild. And so we were able to just keep that running in the background at less than 1K a month for our audience size, which was awesome. Did the same thing again with YouTube. And for us, with this being more of a brand lift campaign, we kind of really dug into more creative video content. And so some of you may have seen the marketing metaphors videos that we released organically. And so they became kind of this pillar piece of content that was part of just a really integrated campaign that meant we were getting touch points with our ICP across multiple different channels. And so I don't want to give away too much of the secret right now, because we'll talk about this closer to the end. But like the initial analysis is, and bear in mind, we have exclusively targeted a Primer audience in Client Boost this year. And we've been able to work out that as a result of implementing this, there is a 15x increase or lift in inbound form submissions from users in this audience versus users that weren't in this audience, which is pretty wild results. And I think that's just as a result of being able to get them on multiple different channels. And so this strategy is not going to be for everybody. So I think companies that are hyper focusing on maybe in-market audiences and need to be able to prove every single dollar in and every single dollar out, it's probably not going to be best for. But there are some real use cases that I think this makes the most sense for. And so one of those would be if you're seeing like low category and or brand name keyword search volumes, if that's starting to decrease, that's just a real big signal that there's more of a demand generation / brand awareness problem that needs to be fixed, and maybe even a broader category problem that needs to be fixed. And so this is a really good play for that. There's also another one, which is just you see in retargeting audience sizes plateauing. So I say this a lot on LinkedIn. You can't rely on retargeting audiences forever. There's a finite amount of demand, and eventually you're going to hit that cap. And then, as I mentioned, the other one is LinkedIn audience penetration is starting to plateau, which was, a few use cases for me working with clients that I was seeing that led us to then recommended, okay, now it's time to move over to Meta. Now it's time to move over to Reddit, for example, and we can get pretty decent match rates on those channels too.
Yeah, and I want to say that there are examples of using those channels for direct response, but I think what you're alluding to is an awesome use case for especially like channels like YouTube where you're not going to see a lot of last click conversion. Or Reddit too, I think, especially on mobile.
Mm-hmm.
Although Reddit desktop, we have a couple of case studies of customers seeing awesome response with awesome direct response
Oh,
results.
nice.
But the key here, I think, is because we are pushing in an audience, and you could think of this audience as like a CSV in some respects of just a list of names that you upload, right? Because we're pushing that audience, you can create two populations. You can have a holdout group that doesn't see your ads, and then you can have a potentially exposed group that may have seen your ads, and you can compare the conversion rates of those two groups. And this is the way to statistically prove the impact of these more brand campaigns. And I think that's always the challenge that marketers run into with brand related budget is they're like, there's a shelf life on awareness advertising because it's typically very hard to prove the impact.
Yeah, 100%. And so thinking about those additional playbooks that we can run, let's move on to the next one. So ICP lead generation. Keith, I'll hand over to you for this one, but this is one that I love and I've seen some good success with too.
Yeah. So there's a few different ways you can approach this, but when you think about like one of the things that Primer excels at is we kind of bring that LinkedIn level of targeting to Google and to Meta. So what we've seen a bunch of customers do is, especially if they're mobile optimized, is if the direct response sort of CPMs and CPLs are going through the roof on LinkedIn, we start seeing people expand into Google demand generation campaigns if they want to stay more targeted, performance max campaigns if they have a pretty broad addressable market and can afford a little bit more waste, and then Meta as well, just like going advertising directly to a specific custom audience, no Advantage Plus, no lookalikes. But then also, you can make Advantage Plus and lookalikes work for you. Again, say if you fall into that PMAX bucket of we've got a lot of people we can serve, maybe like every SMB in the US potentially, that has dynamics of consumer advertising. And if you're not on cheaper channels like PMAX and Meta, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. So I think like there's different key elements of this, but the way it works at a very basic level is you come into Primer, you build an audience that looks like your ICP, you sync it out to your respective ad accounts. In PMAX, you plug it in as a signal in an asset group, demand gen, you add it as the inclusion audience, yada yada yada. And then you run your typical direct response, type campaigns. There's a few caveats though that you should be focused on, right? One is, again, you got to have that. If you're going to do direct response, it has to be mobile optimized because most of these channels are heavily mobile. You do not want to send them to a landing page that's not geared towards that mobile experience. Cool fun fact that not everybody knows about is Meta recently, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, rolled out work email validation in their instant forms, which is kind of a game changer. So for the first time, you can require that work email, like on LinkedIn. So that can make those campaigns pretty effective. And then if you are going to do more of that broader approach with Performance Max or Advantage Plus and lookalikes, there's really like a really cool use case for us around suppression audiences. You can not only build that audience as the 1% lookalike and add it into the ad set, but then you can build an audience that looks like everybody you never want to serve ads to. You apply it as exclusion on those ad sets. And then you're basically telling, for example, the Meta algorithm, hey, do your thing, work your magic. But if you see this population of people here, don't go here, don't serve ads to these people. And it's a way of refining the efficiency of those campaigns. Um, yeah, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I know we got a lot to
Yeah,
cover. And
we
I think
have
that's a
indeed.
segue for the next one too,
It's a
right?
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
perfect segue, and I kind of wanted to just add another little tip around probably both the playbooks that we've run at the moment, which is on like you don't. I think with Meta specifically, you also don't need to reinvent the wheel too much compared to what you're doing with other channels. And so, for us with Meta, we ran essentially on the lead gen side the exact same conversation ad structure that we run on LinkedIn, and it worked really well. So we did have a higher volume of low quality leads with Meta, which is something to be aware of. But actually, when it came down to kind of brass tacks at the end, I think cost per SQL. So SQL for us is book to discovery call, agreed to go on to then an opportunity call where talk contract details. Cost per SQL was about the same, if not slightly cheaper on Meta. So it can be worth running for that reason. And the way to get over it with the sales teams, for example, is just give them a heads up and say, hey, we're going to turn on Meta. There is going to be an increase in low quality leads. Expect that. We'll do what we can to filter it out. But you're also going to close more deals as a result of it. And that can be a good way to get them on board as well. But with that, I think that's a great segue into the suppression audiences, because this has been so probably one of my favorite tactics this year, especially for Google Ads. So one of the biggest problems I walked into when I took over marketing at Client Boost was we just had a really, really unsustainable cost per acquisition on Google Ads specifically. And it was really frustrating because some of our best deals came from Google Ads. Like some of the highest ACV deals came from Google Ads. So we didn't want to switch it off, but we needed to figure out how to make it as effective as possible. And so what we did is we built these reverse ICP audiences. And so this is audiences that are like the direct inverse of our ICP, and then added those into Google Ads. And so that meant that we could have like a pretty good fail safe to reduce the volume of low quality leads coming in from Google Ads. And I know this is that's Google Ads search, for example, but also I think would be a useful strategy to experiment with on PMax, for example. I think it would work there too. And
Yeah.
so yeah,
Oh, just one thing. It
yeah.
unfortunately can't work on PMax. The only suppression you can do on PMax is keyword suppression, which yeah, yeah,
Yeah, damn. That's frustrating. That would have been cool to be able to do, but definitely on search campaigns this works. We even added it, and I can't say exactly how much this helped our campaigns, but we even added these suppression audiences to, for example, LinkedIn campaigns, just to try and reduce the likelihood of LinkedIn maybe going having a little bit too much creative license with our targeting. Same thing when we ran the Meta campaigns, and yeah, we on the LinkedIn side, we're doing so little audience cleanup as a result of this. And also on the Google side, just saw like a really like a really drastic reduction in the number of low quality leads. One thing I would say that you might expect to happen with the reverse ICP audiences is it will reduce the overall number of inbounds, but you will also see cost per opportunity decreasing. And so I can't even read my own screen there, but I think for us, we saw around 40% in platform drop in cost per SQL. There were also, some other, just general campaign cleanup stuff that we did, but that was a big factor in helping us have such a big reduction there.
That, yeah, I think, anytime you're doing something in a B2C platform where you're exerting more control over it. So if you A/B test, like you're doing some sort of native targeting on Meta, you're doing something on search, and you A/B test like with tighter control or without. The without tighter control is gonna like the upper metrics are gonna look better, right? CPLs are gonna be cheaper, CPMs are gonna be cheaper, CPCs, but your qualified cost per lead is going to be a lot higher in comparison. So I think it's a great point to sort of think about, focus on the qualified rate ultimately, because that's really what matters, and overall qualified volume.
Yeah, I would agree. And this is kind of triggering something again, just another little tip for some of the demand gen and performance marketers listening in today. I had a really good conversation with a kind of director of business intelligence, who's kind of the mad scientist when it comes to conversion tracking, analytics, and reporting and all that sort of stuff at Client Boost. And one of the things he mentioned to me is that when it comes to measuring performance in platform, you want to be using those in-platform metrics, like CPMs, like dwell times, engagement rates, CTRs, all that sort of stuff. But as soon as you come outside of the platform, you're trying to measure the performance of a channel, you really need to not be using those in-platform metrics. And like you say, look at, well, what's the just net conversion rate along the pipeline and which of the channels are most efficient? And what you do find is that when you transition from kind of relying on the broad targeting in algorithms in these platforms, which I just don't think have figured out how to do B2B yet. And I think they're a really long way away from being able to do it because it's so complicated. You do tend to see a pretty steep reduction in cost per acquisition, especially on like the SQL close to one side, even if it maybe looks like there's some inflated metrics on the front end. Cool. So I briefly skipped over the audience signal slide there because I feel like we kind of touched on that a little bit. And there's definitely at least two more cool snippets I want to talk about. And one of those, again, another one of my favorites, talk about this all the time, is pipeline retargeting. It honestly blew my mind how many B2Bs wanted to remove pipeline from targeting in paid ads. And I think it's typically a sign of an organization that maybe doesn't have a lot of kind of sales and marketing alignment. Everybody's trying to fight for credit, which kind of like hearts out to people that are dealing with that. But for me, if I was to only be able to run one campaign, it would be the pipeline retargeting campaign. I think the lift that you get from this, you can see there examples that Keith's run is like plus 50% improvement in win rate. I've ran campaigns in the past where we've been able to even show the difference in like ACV. And so we typically see higher ACVs and higher close rates. And when you start taking that information to the sales team, to the CFO, to the CEO, that's when they really start understanding the power of marketing and what marketing can do for them. Because it's really, really difficult to kind of disagree with those kind of that raw data. And so with pipeline retargeting, really straightforward to do in Primer. And so you can just, you can hook Primer up to your CRM. It will then sync contacts into Primer. The reason that I like Primer for this, as opposed to just using like a direct HubSpot integration, one, there's just more channels that it can port to. So you can run this as a separate kind of retargeting layer on Reddit, on Meta, on YouTube, etc. But Primer also now has ICP filtering for those contacts. And so you can add an extra layer of protection to shrink those retargeting audiences to the contacts that make the most sense to target. You can even then just batch them into different segments within Primer, which is a little bit trickier to do in HubSpot specifically, and can have a really big impact on, again, close rates and lift.
I'll throw out another one, another way to run this play that I kind of I tend to do, which is I actually pull in the companies with the open opportunity. So the companies that are in funnel, and then I use within Primer, I use like our job title targeting departments to expand not just to those contacts associated with the opportunity, but to finance, legal, procurement, IT, potentially all the people who might be involved in approving this deal, to try to build awareness and familiarity with them. And then the hold, again, you can do a holdout group of opportunities that don't get ads versus opportunities that do get ads, and that's how you make the business case for doing this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, that's another one of the plays that we actually ran this year. Was, I think we chose COOs because we found like chief operating officers tended to be in the buying committee, CFOs, CEOs, finance team, and legal. And what we did is created content specifically for the kind of pain points and gain points and jobs to be done that our service was relevant to them, and found the weird thing was we ended up actually having a higher click-through rate on this pipeline retargeting campaign when it was to the CFOs and CEOs and COOs, even than the marketers. And we get pretty wild click-through rates even on the marketing side. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So to wrap things up, I figured we were going to be close to the wire today. So measuring impact. I wanted to kind of talk through the case study of Client Boost here. So we switched all targeting from native. So we're using native targeting across all platforms to Primer audiences across LinkedIn, Meta, Google, and Reddit. On Google, we didn't manage to make PMAX work as much for us. I do know plenty of B2B SaaS companies that have been able to make it work though. We use YouTube and display. And so we even tried media mix modeling to measure lift, and we didn't get any statistical significance. And so that's one thing I've realized. I think most B2Bs, especially B2B SaaS with very, very low conversion volume, I think the only way you would be able to make MMM work would be related to clicks, which is not going to give you any good data to make useful business decisions that really drive growth. And so one really cool feature that we were able to kind of beta test for Primer was conversion lift analysis. And so as Keith mentioned, what happens by us being able to have every single channel have the exact same audience on it is that then inside Primer, they can create holdout groups. So a select portion of the audience. So you can see here, I guess that's maybe 5% of the audience didn't see ads, for example, or even 50% didn't see ads. And so what we can then see is what was the conversion rate between people that did see ads versus didn't. And this helps us communicate just a really good story about how effective marketing actually is. And what I love about this is the tricky part about measuring marketing is you're not always going to get quarter versus quarter growth, especially if you're not a hyper growth company. It's, you are going to be subject to seasonality, again, especially if you're a more established company, where typically we're going to see in Q1 and Q2, sometimes in Q3, pipeline's going to be much healthier than it typically is going to get a little bit slower in Q4. And so with lift analysis, what I love about it is it's just agnostic of seasonality, and it's agnostic of marketing conditions. So you can just measure the actual impact that marketing is having versus, if it wasn't switched on, which again, when you combine this with other signals that you have, like, close rates decreasing, close rates increasing, cost per acquisition decreasing, you can make a pretty valid argument for either increased investment in marketing or a good defense of budget moving into the next year.
Couldn't agree more. And if you're not seeing a lift, we will show that to you, because there are examples where it's not working and you got to mix it up. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
check it out. We'll be releasing this feature to 100% of users by the end of the year. Excited about it.
Awesome. Keith, we're slightly over time here, but that
Yeah,
was a lot of useful information. As always, really appreciate your time today. Hopefully we can do this in again in the future.
love it. Thanks for having me,
Cheers.
Patrick.